Hey everyone, my name is Sean McQuaid. I'm a lead software engineer at Chick-fil-A, and I'm just kind of the weird guy who loves the web a little bit too much there. I used to be on our customer technology solutions team as an architect, but I recently moved over to our operator technology solutions team where I focus primarily on restaurant technology. Right now, I'm really focused on supply chain tech, which has been kind of a big change from being customer facing. And I got into coding through self-teaching with Free Code Camp with Mirondo in the back there. So that was pretty cool. Then I went to Digital Crafts for my coding boot camp and was lucky enough to land at Chick-fil-A. Before I was in tech, I was a professional jazz musician and still am. I still play, but I'm way more selective about what gigs I take. So if you want to talk about music afterwards, like I'm open to discussing that for sure. And my main passion point in technology is really enabling y'all to be successful and happier with your jobs. So I hope what I'm going to talk about today is relevant to y'all. And before we get too deep into this talk, I want to level set. I actually love TypeScript, and this is not going to be a bashing session on it or JavaScript for that matter. I started my career with JavaScript and absolutely love it. And I just think it can let you do some crazy stuff, which I'm sure some of y'all have experienced in your careers too. And TypeScript is way better with its static typing system, but inevitably, you can still do some pretty crazy stuff with it. It takes a little bit more creativity. Okay, well, that's fun. Another speaker acting up in there. It's cool. So it gives you basically, in my opinion, fake build time safety and zero runtime safety. But what does this actually mean? Well, again, you can do some wild stuff to make the build pass, and it's pretty nefarious and weird. Oh, the slides also went off too. Perfect. Yeah, and the slides also just might have gone off. All right, we're all tech support, right? Let's see if we can figure it out. Okay. Yeah. Homer, would you mind getting someone? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, y'all. Hold on to the thought of TypeScript letting you get away with stuff too. Just keep thinking about that, because it's definitely not going to make sense until I show some code, so I apologize for that. I didn't trash talk him, man. I was up front. Yeah. If my talks ever become a bashing session, you're allowed to come up to me and like slap me across the face. That's not who I am, and I'm not going to do that. So you can hold me to that. I'll bash myself, but I'm not going to bash anyone's tech or what they're doing for sure. A lot. All right, I think we'll kind of get started. I'm trying to think about recording-wise. Should I just start over, or should I just keep going? It's been a few minutes, right? What time is it? Yeah, let's say I did the intro. So, all right. I'm going to skip the who I am part. All right. No sound coming through? Anything? Yeah. Were you a sound engineer by any chance? Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you do. Cool. Yeah. There's an interesting cross path of like people who are into like music and sound and like software engineering. I don't know what it is. Like, it's a lot of people. Change it out. All good. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, man. Yeah. Fingers crossed, right? Yeah. Yes, I am. I'm plugged in, I believe. Let me double check, but yep, there we go. All right. All right. Let me just put this on my collar real quick, and then I think we're good. All right. Can everyone hear me? I'm heard in the back. I'm good. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. All right. As I was saying, TypeScript is really awesome and cool. It can still let you do some crazy stuff. It takes a little more creativity. I actually went as far to say at my DevNexus talk that JavaScript lets you get away with murder and TypeScript at least helps you a little bit. I would put TypeScript in the theft category. It's like a petty larceny charge. So we're going to do some digging into some examples about how we can trick the compiler and be a little nefarious. And I'm only going to do a few examples of this, but the list will be pretty endless. Okay, so starting with any. If you are using any, you might as well be using JavaScript at that point for what you're passing in. You're effectively telling the compiler this can be absolutely anything. And if I decided to use this function with anything that didn't have some property, and I just said non-existent property, and then had, that's not going to do anything, and it's still going to cause an app crash. And I could have prevented it if I actually trusted the compiler and put something in there that was valuable. So that's not great. And again, the compiler's not going to stop it, so you're not getting any sense of protection from yourself, basically. Most code, we need to be protected from ourselves than each other, really. Now, number two, this is a particularly weird example, but this gets into casting land. How many of y'all are Java engineers or have lived in Java before? TypeScript does not behave the same way as Java. And what you can do is, in this case, I have a string, a very clear string here that I'm casting to unknown. So I'm basically telling TypeScript, hey, I don't know what the heck this is. And then I'm casting that unknown to the type that I think it should be. And on a number, we have to fixed on there. But if I were to just do to fixed on just like an empty string, that method doesn't exist. And that's going to cause an app crash immediately. So again, an example of me telling the compiler, hey, I know better than you. Please shut up and let me do what I want, which is not great. And then the most disrespectful of all, TS ignore. You're literally telling the compiler to please stop talking to me and let me do what I want. Now, all of these examples are usually a little more acceptable in library code where typing gets enormously complex and you're dealing with a lot of just X factors you don't control. But this is actually unacceptable in app code. Like if you're reaching for this in an app, you need to rethink what you're doing ideally. So the list goes on and on to me at least, but in synopsis, sorry, it's like way bigger now, so I'm having to thumb through a little more. TypeScript gives you fake build time safety. You can continue to tell the compiler you know better than it easily, and that should really scare you. I'm very accident prone, and I have fat fingered a lot in production that has crashed some stuff. So let TypeScript be your guide, not your your cover up. And it's still better than just vanilla JavaScript, but not as good as real type safety. So what if we want actual type safety and we want like predictable error handling? Well, Zod is pretty awesome, and it just sounds cool. Like Corey actually made a joke in his talk, like Zod sounds way cooler than just TypeScript does. So Zod is what he said. So we're going to look at some examples real quick of how we can leverage Zod. So example number one, we're really looking at, this is the fundamentals of Zod. It's a very, very basic API. You just take in that Z import and you can do some awesome stuff. So in theory, you just can use Z dot whatever data type you want, spell out some details about the validation you'd like, parse it. So if it's successful, it's just going to return whatever the data is. And if it's not successful, it's actually going to throw an error very predictably for you. And you could also safe parse, which is kind of a nicer way of doing it if you don't want to just have an error get thrown. So you can safe parse the data and you could actually see it's returning the string as I expect, or safe parse it and it'll fail, and the data coming back is that the success will be false and you get an error coming back. So it's actually kind of nice with TypeScript because it's using union typing. So if it's true, it'll return the data validated properly for you. If it's false, you'll actually get a typed error coming back too, which is really nice. And you could use it actually to also infer TypeScript types, which is like super nice. So if I want to use a Zod schema to describe, say, like an API that I might be, or an API object I want to work with, I can use that schema in a multiple different ways. Spoiler for later too. And just kind of going over the data types that Zod gives you, this is a very cursory look. You have your primitive values covered, so your typical string, number, big int, boolean, date, symbol in JavaScript. Down to object types where you can have just a normal object, records, maps, empty types that we should all know and love, arrays, so you can have a tuple in it, which is pretty nice, and again, get some nice typing coming through. Some catch-all types, the never type, which allows no values. And then you have the option for utility types from TypeScript. So you can use the things we know and love in TypeScript, like pick, omit, like optional, null, like stuff like that, and you could have Zod describe it for you, which is quite nice as well. And how many of y'all hate working with enums in TypeScript? All right, at least a couple hands. It's pretty unpleasant. Like, it's not the nicest experience. Transparently, I'm not necessarily leveraging Zod for this, but I felt like for the context of this talk, I had to bring it up as an option. I'm usually using an as-const of some sort to describe whatever readable enums I would like. So You could actually make an enum in Zod. This is very helpful if you're describing specific values on an object that you want to be very clear about. And you could actually get a type for it inferred off of using z.infer, which is nice. Or if you do prefer to use TypeScript's enums built in, you can use Zod to actually take in the native enum and use it as a type in another schema. The cool thing about Zod is you can extend off of each other a lot. We're going to look at that in a bit. So if you have like an object, you could pass, or z.object, you can describe object fields with this native enum thrown throughout it, which is quite nice. And then kind of what I like doing, or this is an option you could do with Zod. The other easier way is just, we're going to say fruits, and we're going to say as const, and I could start writing, let Copilot kind of dictate that a little bit. You can do something like that, and you still get type safety. It's read-only. Again, I just felt like for Zod's context, like it's helpful to know that you could do that if you so choose. And then if you want to actually, it's too big. There we go. Yes, if you want to coerce something, so how many of y'all are familiar with like actual casting in JavaScript, like using number over like a string coming back, something like that? With Zod, you could do this a lot more safely. So you could actually coerce something from a string into whatever it is. So if I pass in a number like 12 here, it's going to coerce that number into a string if it's possible. And if it can, it should throw an error at that point, which is nice. Predictable error handling is always pretty nice. And then if I want to do some sort of custom validation, I could actually use refinements or super refinements to do stuff I want. So instead of, and again, spoiler for later, instead of doing things very manually where I have to check like outside of this validation if the password and the confirmed password are the same, I could use Zod to refine off of it instead. And actually what's kind of cool is if I had nested objects, you could, because these schemas are so extensible, I could do something like, do I want, yeah, this is actually a good example of that. You can refine off of other Zod schemas that are a lot simpler to have your own custom validation and stuff, which is, again, quite nice. So now I thought it would be good to go into some practical examples with Zod. So that's all very theoretical, but like, what does it look like to actually use it in your apps? So I'm going to just get pm dev started up real quick. Now, it's not going to be super clear in the back, so let me just, all right, is that better for everyone? Good? Okay, cool. So let's start with environment variables. So we're going to just look at the code. Again, this is a crappy little React app I put together. It is not meant to be a good user experience. I am not styling it. It is meant to be just purely a demo about how it looks in code. So I'm just going to pull up routes. I'm using React Router v7's beta for this, by the way, and I'll be doing a talk on that tomorrow if you're interested in hearing more about that. But if you look at environment variables, something really bothers me about using process.env, and it's not the most petty thing in the world, but it's just annoying. If I hover over app environment, that can be a string or undefined. I'm not getting any descriptive typing coming through. And same with meta.mode from Vite. You don't really get descriptive types coming through on it. And so here, if I hover over app environment, it's string or undefined. I'm basically displaying like develop if that's it, or if it's the app environment coming in, and same with the mode at that point. But it would be really nice if I had confidence that it's what I want instead of doing these kind of arbitrary checks, and this is where Zod's super helpful. So before we look at this again into like what Zod can give, I'm going to reiterate, process.env is giving me back string undefined for this, correct? So let's look at these schemas I've created. So I've created a schema. This is, again, in the context of Remix or React Router v7. I've created schemas for the client, for the import.meta stuff that's coming back from Vite that can be public. And then I've created a server environment schema for the server's process.env variables. So if I look in here, this is actually kind of cool. And this is what I do on almost every app I work on now. I have an object describing what I would like coming back from process.env. So I have a Vite app environment and a node environment. So node environment is scoped to just process.env. And what's nice about it is I can parse this and just use it, and it's type safe. What I'll usually do to and it's a little bit of friction on my developers, but it's for a purpose. I'll add this schema at the root of my application. So if my developers have not pulled down what they want, like an environment variable that they need, it's going to just crash the app at that point, and they're going to have to reach out to someone. I'll usually put like really obnoxious errors on it, like ask blank for this environment variable, or go to this doc or something like that to help drive the team. And I'll do the same thing on the client as well. But now if we hover over app environment, I was using I'm actually going to pull up that schema again. Sorry about that. We have an enum that I was kind of talking about before, and I'm defaulting it to either to dev, but it needs to only be dev, test, staging, or prod. I like having my own custom app environment determined because there's just different things I want to do in different environments in my application sometimes. But if I hover over this, it's no longer string or undefined. I'm actually getting like very strict types coming back, which is very pleasant. It's a very nice developer experience. And same for the client mode coming back. It's all coming back with a union type, which is quite nice. And now if I go here and I type in flarb, which is a non-existent word, obviously, I'm getting the compiler yelling at me because I'm not using a value that aligns with that enum. That's like super clutch. And if I were actually writing code for this, I get autocomplete happening right away for telling me these are the values from that particular enum, which is, again, quite nice. So yeah, it's great. It gives you some runtime safety because you're validating it at the beginning of your app's instantiation, and you could fail it on build. Like there's a bunch of stuff you can do to help, again, make sure that you are being as type safe as possible. So now let's look at another thing that we don't think of as a user input. You're going to notice a theme here. All of these are what I would consider user inputs, but people don't usually talk about them like that. So let's look at search params. This is an area that gets kind of annoying. I'm going to go back home and I'm going to pull this up real quick. So right now, I just have a search param called query. Again, this is a very naive example. I'm going to display the query doesn't exist if nothing's there. And if the query does exist, I'll do that. So I'm just going to submit this thing real quick. And then the query is going to display. What's kind of annoying about this is I'm grabbing the search param direct off of this, and I have no real validation on what's happening. So this is something we don't technically control. Like I could go here to the browser and type in nefarious thing, and it's going to display that. So that's really scary. Like we should be preventing users from putting in whatever they want unless we're validating it in some way. And you should do this on the server too, but you could also do it on the client. So what we could do with Zod is, I have a search param schema. I'm actually going to go to the example here. And what I have here is, if I have the query, or if I don't have the query, I'm defaulting it to hello friends, so we get something displayed, which is nice. And I'm making sure it's a minimum of 1. So again, we'll default in that case. And we have enums for this. So what I kind of like about this pattern is that for the case of like a modal or a message or something like that, what I like doing for state management, and this is like a front-end specific thing, so just read between the lines on that, instead of having like a million state variables for managing what modal's displayed on like a very complex page, I'm actually going to use the platform and use search params, but I want it to be type safe so my team knows what to display properly. So in the case of like a message here, I just have, if the message is equal to open, we're going to display it. So, hey, Connect.Tech. And then if I want to add in message equals open, then a message displays. And I'm validating it again. So I'm hovering over that. I can see that it's either open, closed, or null, because technically from a search param in the context of React Router, it is nullable. So I'm just trying to catch things to make sure that it makes sense. And I'm getting types coming through, and that is just well and good. Like it's another thing I can validate that I wouldn't necessarily think to do as a developer. Like this is not something that people really talk about a ton, but it's a user input that we technically don't have full control over, so you have to treat it as such and validate it. All right, so now this is gonna get a little, not controversial, but this is gonna be interesting. We're gonna get into API responses. So this is something I'm actually really passionate about getting right, because I've gotten bitten in the butt by this exact thing a million times. How many of y'all have done something like this where you cast whatever's coming back from fetch to be the type you want? All right. Some people in here? All right, yeah. Homer, thank you. So what really bothers me about this is what happens if that API contract changes? I can't tell you how many times I've had APIs sitting on production that I'm calling. They change the API. They don't contract it out or version it at all. My app crashes to the ground. I have to run and fix it. It's a whole fire drill. It's awful. So what if I could validate whatever's coming back from the API cleverly so that way I can do what I need to with it and be guaranteed that it's good? Well, it's a little abstracted out, but I like using the API client pattern. And if I dig into this, I'm using Kai. It's like become a preferred thing for me, but I have this create API client. We're going to look at it in a second. And when I make the get request to post, this is calling the JSON placeholder API. I'm passing in a validation schema to validate whatever's coming back from the API. And it will only return JSON if it matches the schema I provide. So let's take a look at that. If I look at create API client, this is where all of the cleverness is going to come in. So this is not anything crazy, but this is kind of using just some things I've experienced over the years. So this is using Kai under the hood. We're using create to create like an API client interface of some sort. And basically what I'm saying is, hey, after the response, if the response isn't okay, or I don't have a validation schema, just give back the response. Don't do anything with it. I clearly don't care enough to validate it, whatever. But if I do care enough to validate it, I'm going to get the JSON coming back. I'm going to safe parse the data. And if the data is not successful, meaning that it doesn't match the contract that me and this backend engineer have agreed upon, I'm going to actually throw an HTTP error of 422 with a status text of, hey, there was an API validation error, and I will fail quickly if that contract doesn't work, and it's very clear what's going on there. And then if not, and the validation's good, I'm going to return a new response, because after you use JSON on a response, you can't pass it along again. And we're going to stringify whatever the data was to go from there. So I can guarantee that these posts are what I expect them to be. So I have to start up the dev server again real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go to API responses. All right, so again, this is a bunch of lorem ipsum crap from the JSON placeholder API. But hypothetically, again, we're talking about a naive example, but what if the API changed? Or what if I had a different assumption about what the API is? What if there was a required field like, I don't know, someone come up with a made up field. Anyone? Comments? Great. And we'll make it a z.array. So we're using a compound type here of string. Fails immediately. I don't even have to question what happened here. Like, I have something coming through that's telling me, hey, this contract has been broken. And there's kind of two schools of thought. This is very heavy-handed, so I don't necessarily always use this in production. But what I will do is, if I do use it, I make sure my schemas have good defaulting on it, so that way I can, again, work with an object that I control and understand. And then if there's a problem, then it'll get surfaced as a bug during regression testing or something. Again, the point is that we're protecting our users, ultimately. So let's get rid of that schema real quick. But yeah, it's super powerful to be able to error handle very predictably. So that way I can, again, work under the assumption that everything works as expected. And if it doesn't work, I fail quickly and it's very clear where it's coming from, which, again, it's very nice with Zod. Okay, so this was kind of something I hacked together last night. So not the same way of Corey, but I was up late last night and I couldn't get this thought out of my head. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was doing this talk originally was, it's a front-end conference, I should only tailor it to front-end. Well, I think there is probably a percentage of people here who do some degree of back-end, and hopefully they're doing it with TypeScript because that's fun and all well and good. So I kind of want to talk through how we can use Zod to potentially validate a request body, which is another user input. It is something that, if you're an API engineer, people can throw whatever they want in the request body, and you have to deal with it in some way, and you have to think through how you're going to validate it. So I'm using a remix action to cover this, but let me pull up the example real quick. Okay. If we look at request body. All right, so I just have a really simple form here right now, and I have an email, confirm password, confirm password. We've all seen this a million times on sites. What's kind of annoying about it though is I'm going to just hit submit. We get all these errors coming back that I have coming from the server, which is this action. I'm going to actually close this out so it's easier to see. We have to get the form data for each individual field. I'm trying to store the default values, so if it causes a full page refresh, which the default for a form is that it will do that, then I have an array of, an object of errors that are all optional, and I'm basically going one by one and saying, hey, I need to validate if there's an email. I need to validate if there's a password. Is there a confirmed password? Are they equal? And I'm throwing it all back here, grabbing it from the action data. And this is coming from React Router v7 where we get some TypeScript stuff going on. So like, again, this will be covered in my talk tomorrow a little bit more. But if I hover over here, I can see that it's either undefined, meaning that no default values are coming back, or we get everything we want coming back and we're just destructuring it here. This is very clunky. I think this is so bug prone. Like this amount of conditionals makes me feel really anxious and nervous. So, and I'm a naturally anxious person, so that's not like the biggest surprise in the world for most people who know me. But what if I used Zod instead? And I had a form data schema that all it did was I passed in this form data schema somewhere to use as validation, and I get errors coming back that are type safe and default values coming back that are type safe. This is a util I actually sketched late last night, so you can hold me accountable to any bugs that come of this, but I think this would work in theory with a few other things that are coming down the pipe in React. So it's using a generic from TypeScript. I'm extending off of a schema provided from Zod, and I'm basically saying it needs to be an object because that's probably the best shape for this. And I get the form data coming in, which is coming from whatever form data you want. So think like React server actions, perhaps. You could use that for, which is pretty cool. And I'm basically saying, hey, get all of the keys back from the schema that's provided. Only grab the values for form data from those values provided to me from that schema. Validate it. And if it's not successful, we're going to return errors back for whatever the error path is in the message I would like it to be corresponded to. And we're just passing in default values from whatever is back from the form data from the schema, as in whatever's coming from here, where we're reducing this object to whatever the schema keys are. But if it's successful, it means that there's data, and we're just going to say, hey, this data is unknown because I have no clue what it is, but I can use Zod to cast, which this is responsible casting because I know it's actually what it should be at this point. And I'm going to infer whatever the type is for both the default values and the data at that point. Yeah, what's up?
Did your schema have a way to tell whether the confirmed password was the same as the password?
That's a good point. Let me see if I actually added that in. Again, hacked away. Well, we could do something for that. Yeah, we're doing it live. So we're going to use a refinement. And basically, we're going to say if the passwords don't match, give me one sec. If password does not, data.password does not equal data.confirm password, we're going to return false, otherwise return true. Or we could just return, honestly, just return this. I don't know why I was doing that. Yeah. Yeah, you could use refine to do custom validations, and then we could have path of confirm password. And let's see, now this is freaking out a little bit. All right, I'm gonna have to look at, again, I sketched this together last night. I'm gonna have to look at the TypeScript stuff on that. But you're gonna have to trust me that when I didn't have refine, it works properly. So you can do custom refinements off of that to validate that. This is a good bug. I'm gonna have to log later. I was gonna publish this too, so doing it live is great. So now when we hover over this, we have the same exact kind of TypeScript experience, but this is all centralized to like one place. So you can kind of see in theory how much more pleasant it is from like a developer experience and frankly a user experience because our validations are in one place, which is quite nice. Okay, so the next example actually gets into some fun stuff too. How many of y'all love form validation? It's just like your favorite thing in the world to do in web development. No one likes it. Put your hand down, Narando. It is very painful and very, it is just rough to get right. So I'm going to use an example here where I'm using React Hook Form, which is a library for handling form state, but I'm not using Zod quite yet. And I'm just going to show you how manual and painful it is to kind of do some of these validations that might not be in line. And before I get comments on it, yes, I know that email is a native type for text inputs. I'm just using this as an example. So here we have an email, confirm password, and we're grabbing it from whatever values are coming back. And we're basically using watch, which is a function that React Hook Form provides for you to keep an eye on whatever value changes occur. And you're going to see a cardinal sin in React, and I'm going to have a use effect for every single validation flow I want. And I'm going to set the error, I'm going to set the message, and I have 6 use effects in this function, in this component. And I'm registering the email, I'm showing the error message, have a label, all of this. This sucks. Like, this actually feels awful to me. What if we used Zod? I wish the screen were a little smaller to show this, but I'm going to show the refinements here make it way simpler. I just have custom refines for whatever I need to do. In fact, I have even better validation because if I went back to the TypeScript example, I have this stupid regex I had to write. I suck at writing regex. I avoid this like the plague. I would much rather offload that to someone ultimately. So going to Zod, I have a string, and off of string, they have a bunch of like custom validation stuff. So they already have email in here, which is great. And I have that for email, confirm email. I have minimum lengths for password and confirm password. And then I could have refinements for if the confirm emails match and the passwords match. And look at this. There's not a single stupid use effect in this entire thing now. It's totally dried up. It's centralized. It's way easier to use. And now again, I mean, the code down here is the same, but this is the biggest win. I don't have to have anything additional in my component. My validation is centralized, and it's very easy to see where things are happening. So much more pleasant developer experience that can come out of that, which is great. Now, this is kind of the last example I have, but how many of y'all have ever built a date range picker before? How many of you hated your existence for like the 2 weeks it took you? Yeah, it's horrible. It's like an awful experience. And I want to give a quick shout out to ShadCN because they actually have like a very good baseline date picker that's styled and like has a bunch of stuff on it. It's using Radix and under the hood with like Lucid React for some icons, which is great. But we can just pass in whatever we want to this and it's great. But I'm going to use a very similar, you're going to notice a similar theme with React Hook Form without Zod. If I want to do validations here, I have to write this very, very nasty use effect to check everything. And it's like, I have to check if the start date exists and the end date exists and all of this, and it's not great. And I have to set the error, and it's, again, very unpleasant experience. If I go to Zod, I can use super refine, and I can have a type-safe schema describing that the start date is either a date or it's undefined, which is what the component that ShadCN provides that takes. And then I could use a super refinement here, and this is different than refine. Refine's actually syntactical sugar on top of this. It's just a little bit nicer, but I found an interesting bug actually between React Hook Form and using an object with a date that could be undefined. It was a very weird edge case where I had to actually use a super refinement instead, and I'll show you below what kind of it led to. But the nice thing is I can add an issue on my own. I could use this z.custom, have the message passed in, pass in the path, which is nice. And the only effect I have is that I'm just going to trigger the validation every time if its valid changes. So if it changes to it not being valid, it's going to trigger a validation. It'll display it for the user. It's still not great. I've logged a bug at this point with React Hook Form, I believe, and if I haven't, it should be on my to-do list. But yeah, it dries up the code a little bit and again, makes your validation be a little more centralized, which is quite nice. So we still have to tap in, the thing you'll notice between the two, and this is kind of a bummer just with React Hook Form, and this is kind of an aside, you have to use this controller component to hook into components that aren't natively able to be used with like native HTML fields like you would expect, but it's a small trade-off for, again, not myself managing form state for all of this, which is great. So we're gonna go on to some closing thoughts, and then we're gonna do some Q&A, because that's always fun and good, right? All right. Some closing thoughts. Zod is great for validating things you don't control, environment variables, URLs, user inputs, API responses. The list can go on and on. It's pretty endless. And we've only really covered Zod on the front end with some very light backend applications. So think about the power of like a schema validation tool in the backend where, again, you need fairly consistent error handling about things so that way you can return proper status codes to users. The possibilities are really endless for how this library behaves, and it's great. It can really level up your developer experience and the predictability of your experience, which that's fantastic. And it's a great way to ensure that data is what you expect it to be, or if it isn't, you at least fail predictably so you can respond appropriately. It's very extensible, and frankly, you can use it in any way you want through refinements and through any custom schemas you want to put together, which is awesome. I would encourage you all to at least give it a try, and it's been frankly a serious productivity booster for all of the teams I've introduced it on. Every single one of them has come back to me and said, thank God we made this move. Because we were using Yup on some of the projects I was using before, and getting Zod coming in and being able to use TypeScript's like inference with Zod was like chef's kiss. It was fantastic. So I want to thank all of you for your time today. If you have any questions at all, we're going to do some light Q&A in here in a sec. And if you don't want to ask it publicly, I'm going to hang out up front here probably for the remainder of the time I'm booked for this room. So thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Cool. Cool. What's up?
When you were sharing Infer, so and we use that and we love it.
Yeah.
The TypeScript shop and everything. But we're kind of new to it.
Yeah.
So we use refines and super refines and stuff. But like a lot of these use cases, I mean, process that that sounds so good. So I had not seen Infer, which made me sound nuts because
no, it's not nuts.
Because we use TypeScript every day, and we use Zod for our formulation. So my question is, on the Zod docs, it shows an example where you would define like, say like const A equals Z dot string, and then you can infer type of thing. But like, can you just do that with normal TypeScript, or does it have to be like a Zod?
No, the benefit of using infer with Zod is that you could use the same schema for the type description. If I'm reaching for infer, it's usually in the context of like an object where I want to get types off of it. So like I'll use it in APIs, I'll use it for form data, like stuff that's an object. Z.infer is usually better suited for that sort of thing, because if you use Z.infer on Z.string, it's just a string at that point. Yeah.
But you can use it with just TypeScript though. You don't have to do like a Zod type.
Yeah, correct. No, you export like you can name it like type post, and it basically just use Z.infer to extract the types.
I love how much safety and how quick.
Yeah. I like predictable error handling because I'm pretty dumb and I would rather know that something's not going to work very quickly.
Not about you.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah. Yes.
What's the difference between refine and super refine, and when do you need to use refine?
Yeah, so refine is typically what you're going to reach for 99% of the time. Refine is actually like built on super refine. So super refine is like, I've only had to reach for it when I was doing this demo, honestly, for that weird bug. 99% of the time, I'm reaching for refinements to determine like data validation in a custom way.
Does it have mechanisms for doing custom regex without having to write up regex patterns like you were talking about?
Oh man, depends on the regex, because like Zod has, for strings particularly, they have a good amount built in already. But I feel like there's a way. Well, you could use a refinement and extend off of it, and then use a regex in there if it's not built in, and then open a PR on Zod and tell them to add it in. What's up?
So firstly, Zod is compile time and runtime, right? Or mostly.
It's mostly runtime for the parsing and such. No, but it gives you the types you would need for TypeScript, which provides the build time elements to it. Yeah.
Code based on those JavaScript and I'm going to do a more stricter type check. I would have to use it. I wouldn't just have to use Zod.
Technically, you could get away with just using Zod, but I think you'd be better suited using TypeScript as well, because it's just a much more pleasant developer experience to have the two working in tandem. So yeah, that'd probably be my take. What's up?
So when you were typing API calls coming into your UI service, is there some point of like Java call? There's like ignore unknown properties, which the Java developers have. Further to make that I don't want to crash and burn. Like I have what I need. I don't care if they're adding more. Is there like any more unknown properties?
So Zod actually will not validate what it doesn't care about. So if you have an object shape described, anything extra that you don't care about, you're not gonna, like, it'll still come through because it's validated and proper technically, but you don't need to care about it. There is an option actually to turn on that strictness if you want. I've never reached for it though. Yeah. What's up?
Hey, I have a couple questions about creating schemas.
Yeah.
So, when I don't know if you can bring up the one where you did the password and the confirm password. That one might be a good one. So.
Let's see. Can't remember. Nope. That's. Are you talking about the like more naive example, or are you talking? Let me find it. Yeah.
So I guess my first question is, can you compose schemas together to avoid repeating yourself? So like,
Oh yeah.
I know you only repeated yourself once, and I wouldn't bother for this.
Yeah.
But like, if you want, so you could have like a password schema and then refer to it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to dry it up a bit, yeah, you could. Again, Zod's super extensible, so you could abstract out whatever you want. Now, obviously, the rules of abstraction are don't overdo it, but like you kind of you know the semblance of like what you'd be comfortable with. But yeah, technically, yeah, you could have like I've done this on projects at this point where I have like we have very specific regex for certain things on like some of our apps. So I'll extract that out into like its own schema, and then we just pull it in when we need it, basically.
Cool. And then the other question, this is real simple, but did you need to check if the thing is a string before checking if it's in the email? Because wouldn't it have to be a string to be an email? Or
With Zod, you have to use a primitive type for the schema. Yeah, so we're starting off with a string, and then it adds on. I mean, if I just thumb through this real quick. You have all of these methods that are built into just string. Emoji, like that actually exists. It's crazy. Yeah, or they have like functions like max length, like that. These are deprecated now actually, which is kind of cool. Nullish, if it's a promise too. Like there's a bunch of stuff you could chain off of it. So it's again very extensible, but yeah, you do have to describe that it's a string at least to get like that particular custom validation out of Zod. Yeah, my point. Anything else? Cool. Oh, yeah.
So this is TypeScript first, but it will run on JavaScript.
Yep. Yeah. Zod will still work with JavaScript just fine. I just like it more because I think it's a very happy marriage of like, if I'm not doing nefarious things with TypeScript and I'm using Zod, I can have confidence that my app behaves the way I expect it to.
Yeah, I mean that you were joking about the emoji, but that's something that has been a pain in the butt for us.
Really? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
I've explored using the Unicode boundaries, which is.
Oh man, I actually did that exact thing a month ago too. It sucks. Yeah, it's hard. Cool. Well, another question. Nice. Yeah.
So not so much a question, it's more of like another cool place to use Zod. So a lot of modern frameworks and libraries actually integrate with Zod out of the box. So if you define your Zod schema and you inject into the form, then the UI framework of course just knows what to do.
Yeah, like React Hook Form is a good example of that. Yeah.
I just wanted to throw in a comment. I was talking to Corey after his talk, and he suggested, I was asking him if you could take a TypeScript type and generate a Zod schema from it, and he said there's no like built-in way to do that, but he said use AI.
Yeah, that's actually a good response. There's also a website actually for taking TypeScript types and making it a Zod schema, or just taking JSON and making it a Zod schema. I feel like, you know what's funny? That exact conversation has come up 4 times in the past week with developers at my company. They want to be able to take a TypeScript type and make it a Zod schema. And I still don't have a firm answer on that. And that makes me feel so dumb. I need to figure that out. Cool. Well, last call for questions. If not, I'm going to be hanging out right here. All right. Thanks, y'all. Yeah.